Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Director of the Milken Institute, Richard Sandler, and his panelists, His Excellency Mohammed El-Sheikh, Madame Christine Lagarde, Willem Buiter, and Tony Elumelu.
Good morning.
Morning.
Again, I want to thank His Majesty King Ahmed and Crown Prince Salman of Bahrain, together with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Special Advisor to the President of the United States, Jared Kushner, and thank them again for organizing and hosting this very, very important Peace to Prosperity workshop. Over the weekend, as we all know, the United States unveiled the Peace to Prosperity, the economic plan, a new vision for the Palestinian people. I personally found the plan to be quite comprehensive in defining the many issues, setting measurable goals, and outlining the steps that need to be taken to create a vibrant and a prosperous West Bank, Gaza, and surrounding region. You could certainly see the time, the effort, the knowledge, and the thought that Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and their teams put into this plan. As was discussed somewhat last evening, the vision for such a vibrant and a prosperous, sustainable peace in the West Bank and Gaza has been blurred by the absence of a continuous, sustainable peace. Yet at the same time, it's very hard to imagine a steadfast peace without the economic prosperity and opportunities where basic services are delivered and the people of the region feel included, feel respected, and have hope for a meaningful future. That is clearly what the plan is seeking to achieve. This workshop has brought us together, business leaders, investors, bankers, financiers, economists, and government officials, to explore ways to implement this economic plan and make it a reality. The plan is divided into 3 initiatives or pillars, and in this workshop, we are looking at those same 3. For the next approximately 45 minutes, we'll be discussing the first pillar, unleashing the economic potential of this region with our very knowledgeable, talented, and quite experienced panelists. Madame Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, His Excellency Mohammed El-Sheikh, Minister of State, Member of Council of Ministers, and Member of Council of Economic and Development Affairs, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Willem Buiter, Special Economic Advisor to Citigroup, and Tony Elumelu, Chairman Harris Holding, United Bank for Africa, and the founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. So let us begin. Let me start with you, Madame Lagarde. What are some of the macroeconomic management experiences and policy recommendations that you feel could be applied to West Bank and Gaza?
Well, let me just start maybe with a few numbers about West Bank and Gaza, because I think it puts in perspective what we have learned and seen in other countries, and preface that maybe with the fact that no country is going to be the same and no territories are going to be the same. So comparisons are odious, yet we have to learn from them. So a few numbers concerning West Bank and Gaza. A lot of numbers that should be high are low, and a lot of numbers that should be low are high. That's the situation we have at the moment. So growth is contracting. Our forecast for 2019 is minus 1.6. The fiscal deficit is high, around 8%. Current account deficit is high, 10%. What is high and hopefully would be low is unemployment, where we have 30% unemployment in the West Bank and about 50% unemployment in Gaza. And the background of that, which I think is critical for what the plan is pursuing, is the working population. You have a very, very quickly growing population, about 5 million at the moment between the two territories, probably going to double from 5 to 10 million in 2050, that's the estimate. And in 2030, 60% of the population will be working age, which is great and bad. Great if the jobs are there, difficult if there is no employment, no occupation for those young people coming to the market. And I think that gives the context of the ambition that we should collectively have for the economic development. Now, what we've learned from other similar but not really comparable situations is twofold. One is, I think we have a little bit of background on that, of the 40-ish fragile or conflict-affected countries or territories that we look after. We have programs in half of them. And we are seeing some good results in some places and very little result in other places. Let me give you a couple of examples. Where we have seen a good outcome, good results, as Jared would say, are countries like Rwanda, post-conflict, very difficult, landlocked, no commodities, no resources to speak of really, other than people and energy and goodwill and the determination to fight corruption. We have seen really exceptional results there. Another example, Mozambique, which at the time had not identified oil resources as it did later on. Again, conflict, partly at least resolved, stability restored, and again, we've seen a good economic outcome. There are other places which are not as successful. If you look at the RDC, for instance, which I'm sure you're familiar with, or if we look at RCA, where conflicts are still rampant, where violence subsides, despite the efforts, despite some goodwill, we have not seen good results. So that really raises the question of what is needed in terms of macroeconomic background and how can it succeed. Not to speak of the political situation and the imperative of satisfactory peace in order to prosper. What we see is a very, very pressing need for capacity development. And where there has been, from a macro standpoint, good capacity development in the field of public finance management, in the area of central bank strength, and in the field of domestic revenue mobilization, if those three aspects are well managed and well supported, then it gives the background for private sector to actually have a predictable environment within which to operate. Now, the add-on, which is critically important, is the fight against corruption. And we have seen countries where, with those three macro critical components, if anti-corruption is really one of the imperative of the authorities, as it was in Rwanda, for instance, then things really can take off. And, it's not as if the Western Bank and Gaza had not done it in the past. It can happen, and it did happen. 2004 to 2014, we saw an average growth of 9%. So it's a matter of putting all the ingredients together.
So we have challenges and we have opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's a question of how we use what we know and how the people react, it sounds like. So, Mr. Al-Sheikh, as someone very familiar with the region yourself, what have you learned from your activities in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that may be applicable, may even be a case study to the effort to unleash the economic potential and maybe take advantage of some of the things that have been done in the past that Madame Lagarde has been referring to?
Oh, that's interesting. What have I learned from what we have been doing and what we continue to do? I believe that proper planning is probably essential. I mean, we spent a significant time on planning what we are undergoing today in the kingdom by looking at our strengths, looking at our weaknesses, looking at what we need to do to diversify the economy and to really transform the economy and carry out the structural changes that we are trying to carry out in the kingdom to be less dependent and less reliant on oil revenues as a government. It requires a real commitment. It requires hard work, and it requires buy-in from everybody to be part of this process. And if you look at the demographics in the region, the kingdom is part of the region, and the demographics are pretty close in the rest of the region. It's a very young population. And the young population views the world differently than the relatively older population, because today with modern technology, the younger population is connected to their apps on their phones, and they live off of these phones. So the way you even do business and you conduct business is different. I think that mistakes will be made, but you just have to be persistent. You have to stay the course, and you have to continue on the path that you are working on. And we spent a number of years planning for what we are doing in the kingdom. We looked at some of the very strong sectors that were untapped before, tourism, metals and mining, and various other sectors in the kingdom. And now we're focusing on those sectors. Small and medium enterprises is front and center in our Vision 2030 and what we're trying to do. So there's a lot that can be learned from what we have done, and others are actually trying to do to basically work on what they're trying to do. And I think this is no different than any other country in the region, just given the similar demographics and the background. And with this plan, trying to connect the countries in the region and not focusing on one small area, I think is very important, because there is greater opportunity and potential if all the countries that are part of the plan are connected economically.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ilomino, you heard Mr. Al-Sheikh talk about their focus on small and medium-sized businesses. Is it essential, and I think you believe it is, to support small and medium-sized enterprises and the entrepreneurial ecosystem in order to strengthen the Palestinian economy? What can the private sector do, and what should we be focusing on?
So I come from Africa, and we do have a lot of similarities with the Palestinian people, especially in the area of the demographic pressure of youth joblessness. And the point is, big corporations and governments can't create the kind of jobs that we need in Gaza and the West Bank. We need to encourage and empower the young Palestinian people so that they have economic hope, economic opportunities. People who have economic hope and opportunities don't take to extremism. They want to live. They want to enjoy life. It is lack of hope and economic opportunities that pushes people into extremism and other vices. Our experience in Africa and what our group will try to do for a couple of years now is, having experienced poverty on the continent, I say to people, I'm born, bred in Africa. I have come to realize, and my own life story, I have come to realize the importance of entrepreneurship, the importance of small and medium-scale enterprises. Otherwise, how would I be where I am today? If my mom and parents didn't have the opportunity to do their own small and medium enterprises businesses, to send us to school. And the question is, the young Palestinian people, do they have similar opportunities? What should we all do to assist in making sure that we give them economic hope and opportunities? And that's why I welcome this kind of gathering. At the Tony Elumelu Foundation, which our family created in 2010 to help democratize luck, to help give economic opportunity to people who have ideas but don't have capital, to help train, mentor people so that when they get capital, they even know how to manage capital. We committed $100 million, and our experience is across Africa. Every year we support 1,000 Africans. We give them non-refundable seed capital of $5,000 each. To date, we've done 5 years. We've supported about 7,520. We have seen firsthand how this is transforming lives, how this is transforming communities. And so I have become even more an apostle of supporting the small and medium-scale enterprises. But more importantly, supporting those young people who do not have any, I mean, when we say small and medium-scale, these are people who have been able to prove their ideas. But there are a lot of people who have great ideas and might go to the grave with those ideas. They don't have the opportunity to prove their concept. So we need to do this in Palestine. We need to do this to support the Palestinian people, because if we do that, it has a lot of benefits. It has a signaling effect. It tells you, if you see someone, your neighbor, who has embraced this new path and see him, his community, his family succeeding, you would think otherwise. And the point is, we need an ecosystem for this to work. We need the private sector, not just in the region, but across the Middle East. What we are doing at Tony Elumelu Foundation, not for Nigeria alone, I come originally from Nigeria, but across the 54 African countries. Poverty anywhere is a threat to us everywhere. And so we need to work together to make sure we eradicate poverty. Is it possible to eradicate poverty? Yes. Is it difficult? Extremely difficult. But the journey has to start. Government must also play their own role. Government must make sure the governance infrastructure, the corruption, fight against corruption, creating the enabling environment, so that when these young Palestinians get opportunities, it can succeed. If the environment is tedious, they won't succeed. And of course, the international development agencies should assist. You know, the world we live in today, the world need to come together. I was reading a certain report that the World Bank Group and allied institutions have spent about $19 billion in trying to drive innovation and entrepreneurship. From our experience at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, what we're doing across 54 African countries, we can create a lot more impact with fraction of that money. And the difference is that we work with local partners. We live in Africa, we understand issues there. When you stay outside of, say, the Palestinian area, and you prescribe ideas that will work and design programs, it might not work on ground. So my advice as we plan and sit here to talk about all of this intervention is that we should not do it in isolation. We should involve people from within so that collectively we achieve this. But in a nutshell, small and medium-scale enterprises is the way, in my viewpoint, to go. We must empower them so that they can help create jobs and address the joblessness situation we have in the region.
Okay. So, Mr. Bataire, we've heard about some of the numbers in the area, areas where it's worked or not worked. We've talked about the importance of planning and sticking to a plan, dealing with young people, giving them hope. You're a macroeconomist. You've studied the world from different perspectives. How would you go about unleashing the economic potential of this particular region?
Well, of course, a necessary condition for any material progress is, as we said many times, but it's worth repeating, peace, safety, security, including the easy, cross-border movement of goods, services, people, and capital. But the second key, and that is really a domestically generated condition, is high-quality governance, including rule of law, market-friendly institutions, and trust. And here, there's a lot of work that remains to be done. The World Bank has its Doing Business survey, where they ask business-relevant questions, SME-relevant questions, as how hard is it to start a business, dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, registering property, enforcing contracts, resolving insolvency. Well, the West Bank and Gaza are listed in that ease of doing business survey, and they rank 116, 116 out of 190. So that means a lot remains to be done, but also means, this is the good news, that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. If there is the collective will among the Palestinian people to create the institutions of a well-functioning government, enormous potential can be unleashed. And once these preconditions are met, I mean, the investment needs are, well, daunting almost in size. Infrastructure, power, renewable energy especially, right? And fortunately the sun is on the side of the Palestinian people here. Water, clean and reliable. Transportation, land, again, road and rail, sea, air. It's clear that the investment needs, if you add the private investment on top of the infrastructure investment, way exceed any conceivable domestic saving potential. So that means that we need external funding. That's what this is all about. Now, it's an important footnote here. Let's make the external funding either grants or equity-based. Right? Let's go easy on the debt. We saw yesterday in Mr. Kucin's presentation that the indebtedness of the West Bank and Gaza was relatively low. Well, let's keep it that way. Right? And we should not, I think, burden this country trying to escape from a grim past with a high burden of debt. Human capital investment, again, invest in people, education, training, health, it's all there. Now, this requires labor-intensive industries that make use of the natural assets of the West Bank and Gaza, this very large young population, which is pretty well educated. Location, a huge asset, the crossroads of 3 continents. And important asset, history. Not the past 72 years, but the thousands of years before that. So I think that it will be possible to attract FDI on a large scale by having an attractive fiscal and regulatory regime. It will be possible, provided these institutional preconditions are met, to attract private equity and other providers of risk capital. And finally, of course, it's essential to encourage entrepreneurship. If you create the right business and investment climate, business will emerge in industries and sectors we haven't even thought of. This is the wonderful thing about innovation. It does not require a central planner. It's an all-encompassing blueprint. Right? But it requires the creation of the right business climate that encourages risk-taking and innovation. And I'm sure that this West Bank and Gaza can do this, and that they will do it, provided they're given the opportunity.
So it sounds like you feel the plan is hitting on all the right issues.
Absolutely.
The right points. So please.
Do you mind if I add something to what Willem said? I completely echo what you just said. I think it's one of the really good aspects of the plan prepared by Mr. Kushner and presented yesterday is that it identifies some of the sector, some of the industrial and economic sectors that will be conducive to jobs. And I think that, growth can be generated, but it cannot be any kind of growth in West Bank and Gaza. It has to be job intensive. Yeah. When you have 60% of the working population, you need to focus on what is going to be job intensive. And Willem, you rightly said agriculture. Tourism is also identified as such. Construction. Any infrastructure is going to absorb a lot of labor. So those sectors, if they are the priorities, are going to respond to the job supply that is out there, and that's critically important. One maybe minor point, and it's not a disagreement. We always talk about the high level of education, the intelligence, I think it was Mohammed yesterday who was saying that they are the most intelligent in the region. But I think in terms of investment in education, what would also be required is the appropriate education focus on what will develop into jobs. Because there's a great mismatch of skills between the high level of education and the jobs that are going to be hopefully created. So on those 2 points, I echo 100% what you said.
So we've heard a lot about the challenges of the area and things that can or cannot be done. Can this be done?
Can this be done? Well, let me start by saying this was actually done before. If you go back 25 years ago, post-Oslo, where there was a very similar effort, and Mr. Kushner, I'm sure you and your team have looked at what took place back then. If you look at the wall, construction of essential infrastructure, improving public sector operations, institution building, health, education, attracting foreign investment. Madame Lagarde was talking actually about education, specific education. It was actually done back in the mid-90s, between 95 to about 2000. There was a global coordinated effort back then, led by the United States, where all the donor community came together and they established working groups, they established committees. If anybody is familiar with the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, and if you saw the chart that Mr. Kushner put on the screen last night that had a fund on top, it was a very similar structure. The only difference today, actually, that I see from the structure that was back then was the inclusion of the private sector up front. Back then, it was predominantly international organizations and governments hoping that they could actually transform the West Bank and Gaza and then attract foreign investment. If you look at the numbers back then, GDP was at a peak and hit record highs during that period. Unfortunately, when things slowed down and stopped, it collapsed. If you look at the unemployment rates, it was significantly lower during that period than the periods that followed. Primary school enrollment was at record highs. I think it was over 95% during that period. You know, thousands of kilometers of roads. When you talk about infrastructure and specific job-generating projects, it's exactly what the world was looking at back then. They were constructing thousands of kilometers of roads, thousands of classrooms, hundreds of clinics. Everything that we're talking about today took place 25 years ago. And you mentioned that peace is essential. There was no peace back then, but there was the true, genuine hope that there was going to be peace at the end of this process, especially by the Palestinians. And while I accept that peace is essential, back then it was just the hope of peace that got them actually excited and moving. And I was actually fortunate back then to be working on some of these projects, because in a former life, I used to be with the World Bank, and this was part of what I was doing. So I witnessed firsthand what can be done and what cannot be done and how it can be done. And if we managed to do it 25 years ago with significantly less money, I'm pretty sure that it can be done today with the amounts of money and with the private sector participation, if we can achieve that hope of peace. For everybody to start working together to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
So, Mr. excuse me, Tony, are peace and stability critical to attracting private investment today? Not just the hope of peace and real peace.
As an investor, we invest in 23 countries across Africa and also in some OECD countries. Peace and security is quite important for investment, totally important. I also agree with you, Your Excellency, that hope is as important as what you experience today. So people feel that there will be peace and security is important, but we do need to emphasize the need for peace and security in making investment. Having said that, it's not the only thing that drives investment. All the points that have been said there, getting the macroeconomic policies right, as Chris said, is very, very important. Fighting corruption is still important. Dealing with your infrastructure is important. When I invest in our group, we look for where the economy or the system works. We like to go to where there's rule of law. We like to invest in places where you can put your money in, and when you make your investment return, where you can take money out. We want to invest in places where infrastructure is fairly reliable. I do say to my colleagues that the absence of infrastructure is even on its own an investment opportunities. We can't go in and invest. We do that. We invest. We have significant generators of electricity in Africa. But something that tells a lot to me when I want to make investment in our group is the private sector in that environment. Are they doing well? Do you have small and medium-scale enterprises? Are they doing well? And that, to me, is a key point I would like to keep coming back to. We need, and you did talk about the intervention approach last 25 years ago. So the question I was going to ask, why didn't it work? Why isn't it sustainable? We don't want to have a quick fix here. We want to fix something that is permanent and fundamental. And that will be anchored by and on the small and medium-scale enterprise in these places. Making sure we have inclusive growth that brings all to the table, women to the table, young ones to the table. And then it creates hope, and on this one it begets more security and peace. We need to ensure, as we talk about the West Bank and Gaza, that there's a lot of attention on not just creating jobs directly, but making sure that people are empowered to actually create jobs on their own. And also that we break that dependency syndrome. We don't want to stay here, come back here 10 years again to talk about this. We want to empower these people to be able to take care of this and let it rise in that manner going forward. So I see peace as being very important, security important, but there are actions that we can do to make that a constant. And such action, in my viewpoint, we start from making sure that the young ones, as Christian said, 50% of 5 million people under a certain age, we must do something about this. If not, we're going to come back here some years' time again. We don't want to do so again. I want to commend the U.S. government for this opportunity, but we shouldn't be doing this from time to time. Let's fix it once and for all.
So, and I believe the time is now. You don't want to come back and do that. We are coming towards the end. I actually, every time I look at the clock, I think they skipped 3 minutes. But I want to give every one of you an opportunity to leave our audience with the one thought that you might have. If you wanted us to leave here with one thought about unleashing the economic potential of the West Bank, Gaza, and the surrounding region, what would it be? So I will start with you, Mr. Bouter.
Well, it would be to focus on the strength of this 5 million people rich region, which is its young people, and to focus on unleashing that potential energy by domestically generated improvements in the investment climate. Peace and security are to a large extent beyond the control of the people itself. But on the investment climate, they are the ones that can, and I think will deliver. So I'm hopeful there.
Thank you. Mr. Al-Sheikh, what thought would you like to leave us with?
I think I said it earlier. I truly believe it can be done if people do believe that it can be done. And the way to make the people on the ground believe is give them hope that this will be sustainable and this will be everlasting, and that ultimately there will be prosperity, there will be sustainable development which will achieve the prosperity that they want to achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Elamilu?
I think I'd like to see a collaboration, the Palestinian people, friends of Palestine, neighbors of Palestine, led by the private sector in this region, to work together to economically empower these young Palestinians. The truth is, we're talking of about 2 to 3 million people here, the younger generation. It's not too difficult a task for us to touch significant number out of this. If we prioritize them, if we all support them, and the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and we're ready to join hands with willing Middle Easterners and people from this part of the world to do something about the future of these young ones. If we give them economic hope, it will signal a new beginning in this part of the world. I read about this $50 billion, $25 billion infrastructure, and the other $25 billion government. I would like a percentage of that to go in to supporting the young Palestinians. Even if $5,000, what we do, as I said before, we train 1,000 people, we give them $5,000 each to prove their ideas, and they take off from there. And they do well, they can go to banks. We need to have an affirmative plan, something that touches everyone. Let them not read it in the papers about big infrastructure projects. Let them also feel it. That is the strongest message of hope for these people.
Thank you. Madam Lagarde.
Well, we have an economic plan. I think that there is urgency. No economy can survive losing 15% of its GDP, which is what is going to happen under the current circumstances. So if there is an economic plan, if there is urgency, it's a question of making sure that the momentum is sustained. And for that, it will require all the goodwill in the world on the part of all parties, private sector, public sector, international organizations, and the parties on the ground and their neighbors, as you rightly said. If there is a secret weapon, in addition to the young people, I would say the women.
Correct.
If you look at the female labor participation in West Bank and Gaza, 20%, compared with 70% male labor force participation. I'm not suggesting that is going to be the magic trick, but it certainly should be leveraged.
Sure.
Thank you. I got to maybe a third of the questions that I had for this panel, but it was very illuminating. I hope that all of us here, as we think about the advice and the ideas that have been exchanged and will continue to be exchanged throughout this workshop, that we keep in mind, I think, what all of us want. We want peace, dignity, prosperity, and opportunity for all of the people of the region, a more vibrant and a more prosperous Middle East. We may have different ideas on the best way to achieve this, but I have to believe we all want them to be achieved. As I was personally reading through the economic plan and listening last night to Jared Kushner and to Mohammed Alibar and hearing about his optimism, I recalled a teaching from a dear, dear friend of mine of blessed memory back in Los Angeles, a man named Harold Schulweis. He used to talk about is and ought. He would say, focus from the is to the ought, and your mindset will be affected. Is faces me toward the present. Ought turns me to the future. Ought challenges my creative imagination, opens me to the realm of possibilities and to responsibilities to realize yesterday's dream. Ought and is are complementary. Without an is, the genius of our past and the present collective wisdom is forgotten. Without an ought, the great visions of tomorrow fade. Ought demands not only a knowledge of history, but of exciting expectation. Is being. Ought is becoming. The Peace to Prosperity economic plan is a plan for moving what is to what ought to be. Now we will have to see if there is the will and the bold leadership to get us there. For me, it has been a privilege to participate here with you this morning and to join all of you in attending this workshop. Please join me in thanking Managing Director Christine Lagarde, Chairman Tony Elumelu, economist and Professor Willem Buter, and His Excellency Mohammed Al-Sheikh for a very interesting and, for me, educational discussion. Thank you all.